All right, welcome to the party, pals. GRC Mafia, right out of the gate. We're here to break down barriers, foster collaboration and community, working towards a more secure future for everybody. Throughout this presentation that's coming up for HITRUST, definitely drop your guys' questions throughout. We'll have a Q&A section after the presentation, and we'll also have our typical open stage as well. Also, today is Thursday, so you guys can also go into our Discord server and grab our badge as well. I see Cameron's already grabbing that. And welcome to the party, pal. KP, Cameron, Jeffrey. I see you guys already hopping in chat there. Definitely one of the best places is inside of our Discord server where you guys can go through. You can ask questions on YouTube or on our Discord server, but then also you could drop resources throughout and your personal LinkedIn or other social media if you guys would like to connect with each other as well. Once we do open up the stage, definitely want everybody to feel encouraged to come up, ask questions, join the conversation, and so forth. Just don't share anything that you don't want to be public. If you happen to slip up or otherwise, reach out to me on Discord, LinkedIn, or contact@studygrc.org. And then also, you guys are probably familiar with it. So B-Dubs has her website there. That link's going in the chat as well. She's doing a Cybersecurity GRC article every single Monday morning, and then also an ongoing CISSP study group every Tuesday and Saturday. Definitely check out that cissp.britwhite.io link there. It's 100% free, $0. And then hopping into voice chat after the fact to ask questions, dig into some of the topics a little bit deeper, and so forth. And then, of course, we have our website as well for the rest of the platforms, our calendar for the most up-to-date information, and then also our resources page are some of the highlights there. Welcome to the party, pile. Flakinator, PBO's hopping in as well. PBO, are you going live on Friday? I just dropped his YouTube channel in chat as well. The 853 SME over here. But yes, certainly. Let's go ahead and transition over and we'll get the presentation started here. Welcome to the party, pal. Ryan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, and then I'll be marking questions throughout.
Yeah, so Chris, thanks so much, and thanks to the study GRC Mafia that I see is rabid at this point. So I'm happy to be here. I know Marissa did a presentation probably a couple months ago at this point, and I was able to listen to it, and she did a great job. But I figured, why not have somebody from HITRUST themselves come out here and kind of give you a peek behind the curtain. So I'm going to go over HITRUST at a really high level, but I'm also going to dive deep somewhat into the weeds in some areas just to give you an idea of what HITRUST is, how the assessments work, the rigor that's built into them, the relevancy of it, so on and so forth. But before I jump into that, I just want to give everybody a little bit of a background on me. I've been with HITRUST for about 3 years at this point, but before that, I've been working with the framework so almost 12 years at this point. So really familiar with that, but also did a lot of work against 853, some ISO work, lots of HIPAA work because I worked for some firms that were specialized in healthcare. I've worked at some health systems in the past. But beyond that, I have a Department of Defense background, spent about 20 years in the United States Army, started off a really cool tanker, used to roll around on the Abrams tank in Iraq. Then they started throwing me out of airplanes, and then ultimately they made me an IT guy, which, probably what led to my security career. So that's me in a nutshell, and I offer that because sometimes I have a tendency to use, military acronyms and jargon. So if I say anything or if I use an acronym that you don't understand, feel free to call me on it, and I will explain it. But also it's really shaped my perspective on a lot of things that I feel passionate about and have perspective on. So HITRUST has been around for 17 plus years at this point, and there's a lot of misconceptions about HITRUST just generally, and I'll name a few, and if these resonate with you, feel free to put it into the chat. Yep, Ryan, I thought that, or I heard that all the time. One of the common misconceptions is that HITRUST is only for healthcare, and that's not true. And I'll get into some of the reasons why in the future, but the framework has been industry agnostic since about 2018. Second common misconception is that HITRUST is really, really expensive. And if you compare it to, a $2,000 to $5,000 SOC 2, then yeah, you probably would think it's expensive, but the quality of that $2,000 to $5,000 SOC 2 kind of pales in comparison. So you kind of get what you pay for. And we can get into the cost of HITRUST, although I don't have it in this brief right now. I'm happy to talk about that. If there's other common misconceptions or things that you have an opinion on around HITRUST, feel free to throw out the hard questions. If there's something that pops up in the middle, even though Chris told me save Q&A to the end, I may answer those questions. So feel free to throw them in there as the presentation is moving along. So HITRUST was born, like I said, in 2007. It was designed to solve what I call the HIPAA problem. So HIPAA, when it was signed into law in 96 and then enacted in the early 2000s, left healthcare organizations with more questions than they had answers to when it came to what the heck HIPAA wanted them to do through the lens of the security rule and the privacy rule and the safeguards within it. So our co-founder, along with several other industry stakeholders, came together and built this prescriptive framework in order to answer those questions and tell folks and tell organizations, in a granular way, how to implement these controls. Because HIPAA, and I'm going to be really general right here, will say something like, you must have passwords, or you must have password complexity. But what should the complexity consist of? So on and so forth. So that was the catalyst for the framework all those years ago. But we have dramatically evolved and changed and improved, in my opinion, since that time. And I just wanted to paint a picture here of all the things that go into a HITRUST assessment, whether you're the one being assessed or you're the one who is consuming the end report. There is multiple different pillars and foundational elements of that assessment. And we're going to dig into a bunch of this, but it's very layered, almost like an onion. It will make you cry depending on the complexity of the assessments, but there's so much that we can uncover here. So I'm going to start with kind of what we feel is the difference maker. For us, we focus on the relevancy of our controls, and I'll explain what that means. But we also feel really, really passionately about the assurance methodology and the assurance program to include quality as a mechanism or a part of that full-fledged program / methodology. And we recently started writing a report annually. And Chris, if you can throw the link that I put into the chat, the Trust Report link, we released it for the first time last year, and then we just released it back in February of this year. And some pretty incredible metrics came out of that based on our population of organizations. Is we saw in 2024 that only 0.59% of organizations had a breach within the HITRUST certified environment. Said differently, less than 1% of HITRUST certified environments suffered a breach in 2024. And if you couple that or compare it to what we're seeing, and the statistics vary, I see everything from 40% of organizations, I see as high as 60, I've seen even higher, but I'm going to stay in that 40 to 60% range, have suffered a breach in the last 12 months. I think it's pretty compelling that we're less than 1% compared to the industry average. And I'm definitely going to nerd out on why that is and what goes into that. But we actually have 100% of the addressable TTPs and mitigations for the MITRE ATT&CK covered in our 3 assessments. I believe Marissa talked about the 3 assessments. If not, I'm going to get into that. I'll talk you through what all those look like. But we also, even though many times where assessments are kind of point in time, we feel that we're somewhat forward-looking in the way that we have built the entire program, not only from the way that we craft the maturity levels within the assessments, but the fact that we have recertification cycles and we require our customers before they're certified to write corrective action plans. And if you look at that bottom statistic, for repeat HITRUST certified customers, there were 54% fewer corrective action plans than in the previous year. So when you think about continuous improvement through the lens of potentially continuous monitoring, we're serving as a forcing function in order to deliver that and ensure that that's in place. All right, so I'm going to take this in buckets, if you will, right? I'm going to start with the framework. As I mentioned, it was built in 2007. We update our framework at minimum twice a year. And if you look at other standards, regulations, and/or frameworks, that frequency isn't happening. You know, ISO 27001, the current version is 2022. Before that, it was 2013. So there was a 9-year gap between updates to the controls within ISO 27001. And if you think about the things from an attack perspective or a malicious actor perspective, and from a technology perspective, 9 years is a really, really long time. You know, generative AI did not exist 9 years ago. Other versions of AI did, but not the way that we're seeing it today. So the way that technology evolves, we feel that we need to maintain our framework at a much more consistent basis. We're also we consider ourselves a harmonizer or a framework of frameworks. So as our recent version 11.5, we are mapped to 61 what we call authoritative sources. So think about standards, regulations, or frameworks, and I listed a few there. So our whole premise is we don't feel that it makes sense in any world for an organization that may be in a multi-reporting or multi-regulated environment where they need to do separate assessments to satisfy all of their requirements, especially when you consider most frameworks have a pretty considerable amount of overlap. Why should somebody have to pay multiple times to cover the same controls? And teams internal to the organization shouldn't have to provide the same evidence over and over and over and over again. So what we're really trying to do is reduce that burden, reduce that redundancy, increase the efficiency for teams internal to an organization to meet all of their requirements, but do it in a smart way. So HITRUST as an organization, we don't do any assessments. We are the governing body over our framework, and we're the certification authority over the assessments built on the framework. We actually require that an independent external assessor or audit firm, think about professional service firms, think about audit firms, CPA firms, if you will, do the work of do the validation work and do the testing within the environment. And we don't just let anybody willy-nilly do this type of work. There's actually a process that they have to go through, much like if you're familiar with FedRAMP, the 3 PAOs, there's a lot of requirements that the 3 PAOs have to go through in order to be a 3 PAO. Well, we have a similar program. So they have to submit an application to us. As a part of that application, they have to give a background on all of the auditors or all of the analysts on the team to include, their relevant IT audit experience. Now, knowing the way IT audit has churn and turnover, we don't really focus on the ground level analysts as much as we look at the leadership team and have their experience from an IT audit perspective, but we do expect the analysts to have experience doing these types of audits. And one of the things that we really focus on are the policies and procedures for that entity around ethics and integrity, right? Because they're supposed to be an independent entity, independent organization, an unbiased organization in this ecosystem. So we want to make sure that they have the right culture to do this type of work. And truth be told, we've actually kicked external assessors, these firms, out of the program for ethics and integrity violations. So we are regulating that environment. Unlike, and again, I'm just drawing comparisons. I'm not throwing anything else under the bus. But unlike ISO or SOC or anything like that, there really is no feedback loop other than the market responding to a really bad auditor. So we are deliberate in that effort. As an audit firm, they have minimum requirements. So they have to have a minimum of 5 people on staff that have attended and passed our certification course, the CCSFP, the Certified CSF Practitioner. I failed to mention that our framework is called the HITRUST CSF. What that used to stand for was the Common Security Framework, but many moons ago, we added a privacy domain, so we just shortened it to the CSF, and that's officially what it's called now. So those 5 CCSFPs must be on staff at all times, and it's a 3-year certification cycle. So they get their initial certification, and then they have to do refreshers for the next 2 years before they have to recertify again. So we're constantly kind of putting our thumb on them and retraining them and making sure that they understand what the expectations are to get these assessments done. On top of that, and I'm going to get to in a future slide why we did this, we actually require 2 CHQPs. These are quality professionals that we've also trained and certified to do quality work on the assessment prior to submission to HITRUST. They have to sign an agreement with us, maintaining that they're going to follow all the rules or be subject to, whether it be something punitive or what have you. They are legally obligated to do these assessments appropriately according to our rules and with ethics and integrity. Just a quick data point, and this one's actually from our 2024 trust report, but in 2023, we provided over 37,000 training hours through our academy, training folks like external assessors, or sometimes it's folks who are within the organizations being certified, but we're constantly training folks on the methodology and what we're trying to do. And I think it's important to point out that you look at the graphic on this slide, 74% of the hours spent on an assessment were done by a CCSFP. So we don't require all the hours to be done by a CCSFP. Actually, the minimum requirement is 50 hours. So half of the testing and validation has to be done by a CCSFP, but you can see that our external assessors have taken to heart the training and the rigor, if you will, that we put into these assessments, or we're forcing them to put into these assessments, that they want their trained and authorized staff members to do the work. All right, so we talked about the framework, we talked about the external assessors, which is about 120 of those external assessor firms. So it's not just a small pool that can drive up the prices. There is a lot of competition there to make sure that the prices are right size. But again, we can talk about that in the Q&A if anybody's curious. The assessments themselves, there's 3 of them. We have our R2, which stands for risk-based 2-year. If any of you are familiar with HITRUST, this is the assessment that most people associate with us. This was just called the HITRUST Validated Assessment up until about 3 years ago. This, I would call a significant emotional event. This is not for the faint of heart. The average size assessment for an R2 in 2024 is 379 controls. So not a small assessment. And I'll get into this in more detail in a future slide, but those 379 controls at a minimum have to be tested based on 3 levels of maturity. So when you do the math, the amount of testing and validation work that goes into that assessment is not small. And we actually require evidence at every maturity level. So this is not a yes/no assessment. This is a trust but verify assessment. And in my former life of doing HITRUST assessments, my customers against an R2 would generate 800 to 1,000 pieces of evidence and or artifacts to support the scores for the assessment and the validation. The reason why the R2 is called risk-based is because you tailor this assessment based on your organizational profile. And if you are considered, by HITRUST's opinion, to be a more risky organization, the requirements within the assessment, the controls within the assessment actually increase, or they get more rigorous. They're more demanding of you, if you will. The second assessment is called the I1, and that stands for implemented 1 year. So it's a 1 year certification, and it's focused on just implementation of controls. Now, that's not to say that policies and procedures aren't considered in that assessment, because sometimes policies and procedures are the implemented control. Think about disaster recovery plans, business continuity plans. That plan itself is the implemented control. The smallest assessment we have is the E1. That stands for Essentials 1 year. 44 controls, and it is the bare minimum. This is the floor. What I tell folks is, if you're not doing these 44 things, you need to rethink your life, because you are inviting headache and heartache into it in the very near future from an incident/breach perspective. This is the 44 things, regardless of what industry you're in, what risk you present. These are the things you need to be doing. The I1, it's on the slide, 182 controls. Those are leading security practices. So it's a balance between the R2 and the E1, but it's the things that really mature organizations should be having in place. And I skipped over the first bullet, but to me, as a former, really cool security guy, now talking head, that first bullet is what I think makes us really different. We actually base our controls off threat intelligence data, not because we're sitting in a room with really big-brained people thinking that we're the smartest people on earth saying that these are the controls that matter. Yeah. We are actually ingesting threat data and letting the data tell us what controls matter, because the bad guys and gals have a say. Why not listen to them and have them tell us what matters from an exploit perspective? So we're ingesting that threat data on a quarterly basis. And as the previous slide mentioned, we are mapping that and bouncing it off the MITRE ATT&CK framework, looking at all the TTPs, and then the related mitigation recommendations from MITRE. And we bounce that off of primarily the E1 and the I1, and I'll explain why just those two in a second. And if we identify either an element of an existing control that is insufficient or missing, we change the control. If we find that a control is just flat out missing, we add that to protect all future assessments against that control moving forward. So when you think about the relevancy of the controls, they're about as near real time as you possibly can get. They're based off intelligence of what's happening in the wild as of 90 days ago. So to me, that's the sex appeal. That's the thing that gets me excited about why HITRUST works and why that 0.59% is what it is because we're actually not just doing assessments for the sake of looking at all the controls in 853. We're focusing organizations on the controls that matter, and we're committed to doing this. I actually heard recently that we're going to start doing this on a monthly basis. And you may be wondering, well, you're shifting the goalpost on organizations looking to get certified, and they have the option to take the new controls, or they can just continue to pursue where they're at. But when they recertify again, they are forced to take on those new controls. So it's not really shifting the goalpost. We give them options. One thing I want to point out is, when I say 44 controls in the E1, 182 controls in the I1, on average 379 for the R2, we built our controls really on the elements of the controls and not the control statements themselves. So within the E1, there's 127 elements. So think about 127 different checks and tests and things an organization has to demonstrate that they have maturity against and it's scaled, right? So just because you can say that you have MFA in your environment on a yes/no questionnaire, but it's actually not scaled to privileged users, or it's not scaled to all the systems within your environment. All of that is taken into account with a high trust assessment. The I1 has 639 elements, and then, as you may guess, because there's a variance or the ability for the R2 to be tailored, the elements. Actually, I think the last number I heard, somewhere near 5,000 different elements that are checked during an R2 assessment. That's why I call it a significant emotional event. All right, so we've talked about the framework. We talked about the fact that HITRUST doesn't do any assessments, doesn't do any testing or validation. Let's get into the validation. We have an entire handbook, and Chris, if you can put that into the chat, that tells our external assessors, publicly available. Any one of you can read this at your leisure, maybe when you're really bored, because it is pretty comprehensive, that tells the assessors exactly what they need to do. So the things that I'm going to run through right now is just scratching the surface. It's not even all the things that we tell them that they have to do and all the considerations and how the assessment needs to be conducted. I'm just hitting the wave tops here. We actually allow these external assessor firms the ability to do readiness work and validation. Now you're like, holy crap, independence. There's an independence issue here. We separate that at the executive level. So the team that does the readiness work cannot do the validation work. And those two teams need to be separated at the executive level of that organization. Now, really passionate people may say, well, there's still, potential for independence. But when I get into my QA spiel, I'm hoping that will ease some of your concerns. The controls have to be implemented for 90 days prior to testing. Policies and procedures, 60 days. So it is not possible for an auditor to come in, identify a gap, tell the customer there's this gap, and the next day the gap is filled and they say, yep, you're good to go, pass. They have to be able to demonstrate that this control has been implemented and functioning for a minimum of 90 days before it can be tested. Same thing with policies and procedures. So being able to, throw things together last minute is not something that happens in the HITRUST world. In fact, when you think about how long it takes an organization to get HITRUST certified, obviously it depends on which assessment they choose, but most organizations do months and months and months of remediation work in order to be prepared for the validation, because we have this rule in place. All testing and field work must be completed within a 90-day window of submission to HITRUST. Now, most of the evidence is going to be collected in that 90-day window, but for certain controls that may be operating at a frequency that would exceed the 90 days, think about an annual test or a quarterly test or what have you, though that evidence can be collected outside the field work period, but everything has to be tested within the field work period. As I mentioned, 50% of the testing hours must be conducted by a CCSFP. We don't allow the external assessors to write the reports. We write the reports. But as a part of the submission to us, which happens in our SaaS-based platform called MyCSF, they not only have to score the organization at the maturity levels relevant to that assessment. Like I said, for the R2, there's technically 5 maturity levels. 3 are required. The other 2, they can opt in or out of. For the E1 and the I1, it's 1 maturity level, but they have to not only score the customer for each requirement at each maturity level, but they have to add commentary on how the test was performed, what was the outcome, what were the exceptions, and they have to provide evidence to support the testing and the narrative, if you will. As a part of the assessment, we require them to build a test plan and generate working papers. So they have to tell us how they plan on testing the environment. And then they have to tell us how they tested each requirement and the outcome of that testing. And it's based off of a population size. So if there are, 250 endpoints in the environment, and we tell them according to our testing methodology that they have to sample at least 10% of them, they're going to sample 25 endpoints within the scoped environment to ensure that that scale happens. It tells the sampling methodology, whether it was deliberate, whether it was random, whatever it may be. There's a couple different options all in the handbook that they can utilize. And they have to, and I probably already have said this a couple times, they have to collect the evidence. They can't just talk to the customer and say, hey, are you doing X, Y, or Z? And the customers say yes. They can do that, but then they're going to follow up and say, please show me the evidence. And that is honestly the hardest part of what HITRUST is doing, in that most people are not used to providing the level of evidence in the way that we tell them, because we actually tell them that there needs to be a date timestamp of when the evidence was generated and when it was collected. We want to know it was collected in the right time period. We also want to know that it is a piece of evidence that's still relevant. If they collected a piece of evidence for a daily control, but it's 15 months old, that doesn't fly. It has to be relevant. So for a daily control, we're going to want to see 30 days worth of that control functioning and in place. I mentioned R2 is based on a 5x5 maturity model. So there's 5 levels of maturity. Is there a policy that governs this control? Is there a process that tells people how to implement and manage the control? Is the control implemented? Is the control's effectiveness being measured? And based on that measurement, are you managing that control? Meaning, are you taking the output of the measurement and then rolling it back into one of the first 3, whatever the reason why it wasn't operating effectively? They have to prove that. And then our scoring is based on 5 levels of scoring. Think 0 to 125% increments. So when you think about the granularity of scoring, it's better than no exceptions or pass, fail. It actually gives the consumer of the report a little bit more to go off of from a, how mature is this control within the environment. Mentioned the test plan. Those test plans, when I was an external assessor, were really annoying to generate because there's a ton of information in there. We require a timesheet to be submitted. So when I talk about 74% of those testing hours being done by a certified CSF practitioner, that's where that comes from. Prior to submission to HITRUST, if there are any gaps in controls required for certification, they have to write a corrective action plan. So it's not just, oh, there's a gap here, everybody moves on. We want to know what's your plan to close this gap in the future. So from a scoring perspective, that's the gaps are determined based on the score. So to get certified, you need to score over a 71 at the domain level. So there's 19 domains within our framework. All of the controls in the assessment fall within one of those domains, and it's a roll-up score at the domain level. So you could not be really mature on one control, but you're mature in everything else in that domain, and you can still get certified. So there's flexibility in the framework. It's not as rigid as it may seem like on the surface, but you're going to be required to write a corrective action plan. And we actually require for the R2 at the interim assessments that you demonstrate or the external assessor can verify that you're making meaningful progress on closing those caps. So I mentioned on a previous slide that there's 54% fewer caps for repeat HITRUST certified customers. That's because we are forcing them to do that, honestly. Excuse me. All right. Want to point out the graph on the right because I think this is pretty compelling. And when I talk to TPRM teams about the amount of time that they're spending doing due diligence on their vendors, I usually ask, are you spending an hour per vendor? Reading the answers to their questions for your questionnaire, or reading their SOC 2 or their HITRUST or whatever. Are you spending 10 hours? Are you spending 50 hours? What's the average? And the highest I've ever heard is 40 hours per vendor. They're spending 40 hours per vendor. It's not too bad. They must have a lot of analysts and they can spend a lot of time, or they have only a handful of vendors that they can spend that much time. The average number of hours spent on a HITRUST assessment is on this graph. So the E1, 101 hours, 44 controls, 101 hours. The I1, 306 hours, and for the R2, 492. So when you look at, on the high side, a TPRM analyst spending 40 hours with one vendor compared to nearly 500, the level of rigor and the depth that's being performed in this assessment overshadows a questionnaire or whatever their process may be. So relying on a HITRUST report, at least for me, and I'm biased, but I'm biased for a good reason. I've helped organizations for years achieve this certification, so I've seen firsthand that it works. It would leave me with a much higher level of comfort that what's in that report is actually representative of what's happening within the environment. All right, so I told you that the threat-based control selection is one thing that gets me really, really excited. Our submission and QA process is the other thing that gets me really, really excited. So if you look at, let's take NIST, for example. If I'm a professional service firm, a consulting firm, and someone asks me to do an 853 assessments of their environment, ultimately, I'm QAing my own work. I'm doing the testing, I'm writing the report. Maybe there's a second person who's going to read the report, but they're likely going to read the report for grammar, for things like that. They're not going to be reviewing your testing. Now, I know that's a broad generalization, but bear with me. For something like a SOC 2, there's in theory 2 levels of quality assurance. There's a management assertion, a management representation letter that the organization being assessed has to sign that basically says, we were ethical, we provided factual evidence, we didn't fabricate anything, so on and so forth. Then you have the CPA who signs off on the report. And that's kind of where it ends. I mean, AICPA does have a peer review process, but it's not comprehensive. It's the actual peer reviews. It's a flawed system. You hire the other CPA firm to come in and do your peer review. So you're paying the person who is supposed to tell you whether you're doing something right or wrong. And the sheer number of peer reviews that are happening is, I think it's something like 3%. It's not happening all that frequently. FedRAMP is a little bit different. Things like that are different. They're a little more comprehensive. So there's multiple layers for a FedRAMP or a GovRAMP because you have the third party, you have the 3PAO that's doing the assessment, then it goes to the PMO or it goes to the agency itself, and they're doing the review as well. For HITRUST, there's 6 plus levels of quality assurance. So like the SOC 2, we require a management assertion. So the management team at that organization has to assert that everything that happened during the assessment was on the up and up. There wasn't any issue. They didn't fabricate anything. Then you also have the individual analysts, those CCSFPs, who have to sign off that they did the testing and they have to sign off that it was done kind of on the up and up. We then require an executive sponsor for that external assessor to review the report or the outcome of the, not the report, but the outcome of the assessment, all of the information that went into it, typically in our tool, MyCSF. We also require that that certified QA professional does a full review of the assessment. So they're actually digging into the evidence and making sure that the testing matches the evidence and vice versa, and matches the test plan and matches the working papers, so on and so forth. So the analyst, the QA professional, and the executive sponsor, all at the external assessor firm, have to sign off on the assessment, and that's a part of the submission to us. Upon submission to us, we run automation against that assessment looking for quality issues. It's about 250 checks that get run against that assessment before a human on the HITRUST side ever picks it up. If we find too many quality issues, we reject the assessment. And in 2024, we rejected 21.5% of assessments. That doesn't mean they didn't eventually get certified, but we kicked it back to the external assessor and to the customer and said, go fix this because there's things that are wrong here. NIST isn't doing that because NIST doesn't do assessments, but even people who are utilizing, whether it be the CSF or 853 or 171 or whatever flavor of NIST you want to do, they're not doing that work. CPA firms are not doing that. The AICPA is not doing that. ISO is not doing that. So we're actually rejecting things up front who don't meet muster. All right, for everybody else that's not in the 21.5%, gets through our automated checks. We have a quality analyst review the assessment. And they're doing a couple things. They're checking that the testing and the evidence support the scoring and so on and so forth. But what they're actually doing more of is checking the checker. And the checker in this case is that external assessor. Did they follow our methodology? Did they adhere to the handbook that has been posted in the chat? And if everything is clean, and there's always a dialogue between the external assessor and that QA analyst at HITRUST, if everything's clean, it goes on to the next step. But if it's not clean, if we identify issues with the testing methodology, we actually take that assessment out of our normal QA process and we bring it up into what we call escalated QA. And we dive deep into that assessment. And if it does not turn out that the assessment was done the way it was supposed to be done, it doesn't get certified. There's really no recourse from that point. Like, it just does not get certified. And that's never a fun conversation with the end customer that their external assessor may have messed up or whatever those circumstances may be. Sometimes it was just a lack of detail in what was submitted by the external assessor. They're able to provide that detail, and that assessment comes back into the normal QA process and moves on. I think in 2021, we had an 11% escalated QA rate on all assessments. In 2024, I think it's just over 1%. So we actually are doing a good job of training our community on how to perform, at least from a HITRUST perspective, a quality assessment. So the fact that escalated QA numbers are going down means that we have a good feedback loop with our external assessors to make sure that those assessments are being done in the right manner. In 2023, our QA analysts spent over 14,500 hours performing reviews of assessments. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of time on these assessments. We also, and I was pleased to see this in our report, our QA analysts on average spent about 85 hours in their own personal training to continue to sharpen their skills. Anyway, I digress on that. The next step is, well, we haven't even certified them at this point. If it passes our quality assurance review, it goes to our compliance team. And our compliance team is checking the checkers who check the checkers, right? So the checkers are the external assessors. The checkers checking the checkers is the quality analyst. and they're the checkers checking the quality analyst. So right there, we've had countless sets of eyeballs looking at that assessment. And we do this for every single assessment. If you see a certified HITRUST report, it went through this process. And I want to make sure, all right, it is on this slide. So that's the 6 levels of quality assurance. And we actually go further than that. This is where the plus comes in. Our compliance team actually will go back on a quarterly basis and dig deeper into these assessments and make sure that our quality assurance team is doing their job. And what we found in 2024 is that 95% of the QA work was found to be without error. Now, sure, it'd be great for it to be 100, but the fact that we have this feedback loop and, we're all humans, so sometimes things are overlooked or mistakes are made, but we're on the high end of that percentage, I think speaks volumes to the way that we built a comprehensive program to provide that feedback loop and ensure that the quality is there. All right, the last layer is we have a quality advisory committee at our board level, and they're charged with making sure that our quality program is functional and is providing value. So sometimes they sample reports, sometimes they're just giving guidance, maybe they're making changes to the way that the quality process runs, but we have board level visibility onto the quality process. I like it. I think the more eyes you can get on the assessments, the better. Improves the outcomes, improves the reliability. So I'm coming to a close here. I know I probably talked a little bit longer than I should have, and I think there's a few questions in the chat. To me, it boils down to 2 things. The relevancy of our controls. We're following the threat actors or the malicious actors and threat data. They're telling us where to look and what's important. And then between our assessment methodology and then the QA that we run on the assessments, the reliability of our process, that's where this data point that candidly, when we released it in 2024, it was 0.64%. So we've actually trended down in the last year. I went back to my assurance team and I said, you guys need to go redo this map because there's no way that we're less than 1% compared to the rest of the industry. But here we are 2 years in a row. The data is the data. This always begs the question, well, is everybody reporting to you? Very fair question, but let me tell you a couple things that go into that reporting requirement. 1, we contractually obligate all of our customers to report incidents to us. 2, we're monitoring open source information. So if there's a breach, we're monitoring that and we will proactively reach out to the customer to ascertain the nature of the incident or breach or whatever it may be and determine whether action needs to be taken. Maybe there's something that needs to change within our controls library. Whatever the outcome is, that's a part of the process. But we also require our external assessors, whenever they do an assessment, they have to verify that there hasn't been any incidents in the environment prior to that assessment being recertified. So we have a lot of ways of identifying incidents and/or breaches. Is it perfect? I don't think anything's perfect, but let's say we even had a margin of error of 15%, which I think would be really, really high. We'd still be well below that industry average of 40 to 60% breaches in the last 12 months. So I think that might be my last slide. So I'm going to pause there, maybe take a breath and drink some water.
Yeah, that's really great. Yeah, a lot of information there. So there was a couple things I wanted to mention first. We do have like 16 questions lined out, but we'll prioritize some of those. You did mention that a little bit about being biased. One of the things I wanted to add there is you might be biased, but you chose to be. You chose to work with HITRUST. So. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I saw it working. Like, why would I not want to help more organizations?
Yeah, from an assessor's point of view, because that's what you were doing previous, right?
Yeah.
And then especially with your background, that's pretty interesting. Tanks and jumping out of planes to risk management stuff.
Yeah, I always tell people that the Army sent me to Iraq. I got shot at. I got blown up. Like I said, people used to throw me out of planes, but the scariest job I've ever had is this one, cybersecurity. It's terrifying.
Yeah, especially in this day and age. So I'm going to go ahead and pick a couple of these ones out. A corrective action plan. Are you referencing something similar to a POAM?
Yes, I should have made that correlation. It's the exact same thing, just a different acronym.
That's what I was thinking as well. And then you did mention the 21.5% rejection rate as well. That's actually kind of surprising to me. Like, also something else to note here too is that I feel like there's a misconception. Healthcare always gets associated with HITRUST, but it's for way more than just healthcare, is what it seems.
So I mentioned I think it was 2018, we made the framework industry agnostic. It used to say HIPAA, it used to say PHI, covered entity, business associate. It doesn't say any of those things now. And the fact that our controls are based off threat data, that's cross industry. That it's not healthcare threat data. It is every industry's threat intelligence that we're basing these controls off of.
Yeah, and there was a slight joke in chat as well I wanted to mention too. People talking about how it sounds like the big brother to the 53 for NIST.
So it's interesting that you say that, because the original build of the framework was built off of 27001 and elements of 853. We have 853 mapped into the framework along with 171 and others. But I've actually got a pilot working with GovRamp, and I'm working on a pilot with FedRamp right now, where they'll take a HITRUST assessment in lieu of a separate assessment for them. So they've been briefed on everything that I just shared with you, and they're like, holy crap, this is pretty comprehensive. We could probably rely on this.
Yeah. And that seems to be the main selling point as far as HITRUST goes, is that it's already mapped. You already throw everything into one thing. And the mention about the TTPs for the MITRE ATT&CK, that's not an easy feat. And no, 2 updates a year on average, I believe is what you said?
Well, the framework, so there's the framework, and then there's the assessments. The assessments, the controls within the assessments are pulled out of the framework. The framework itself is updated twice a year. So that's where we change sometimes the structure of the framework. Sometimes all we're doing is adding additional mappings. Sometimes we're changing the language in the controls themselves. But the work that we're doing with MITRE is actually happening every 90 days. So we're updating the framework twice a year, but we're changing potentially the controls. Truthfully, it doesn't happen that often because the controls have been normalized at this point based on current threat landscape, but that can change every 90 days.
Now, with how often that's updated, is there like renewal training or other checks and balances to make sure that these assessors are up to date with that? Or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a couple of mechanisms for that. I mentioned that we require CCSFPs to do the majority of the work. They have their initial cert, and then they have 2 years of refresher before they have to be recertified. So they have to maintain that certification. And that class is all about the latest and greatest from our methodology. But we also issue advisories, which is on our website, that if we have any changes in the way that we're going to do stuff, we put out this advisory to our community to educate them on that. And then we also provide webinars as necessary based on those advisories to ensure that they're on the latest and the greatest. But we also update our handbook, which I think you put in the chat. That is ground truth for all things HITRUST. So as we update that, we educate them on that, but that's always a reference point for them if they ever have any questions.
Yeah, I think that's a really good mention. And then also another really good one, I think, which is kind of pressing the needle a little bit more, is so with a 21.5% rejection rate, and then you mentioned that like over 70% are from those certified assessors. Is there any type of like association with the assessors? Like, do they get in trouble for that, or quality assurance regarding that? Because it sounds like, you're certified for that. And then there's another question based off of that, but I'll go ahead and let you answer that first.
Yeah, so the training for the CCSFP kind of teaches you the ins and outs of HITRUST. it doesn't teach you how to be an IT auditor. So there is a rub there, if you will, where you can get certified on the HITRUST methodology and just be a really crappy auditor, and that can come out in the wash, if that makes sense. That's why we feel we have to have such a robust QA process, right? Because if you compare it to other things that are out there, if you have a crappy auditor, then you had a crappy auditor, and you're going to get a report based off a crappy auditor. Do you know what I mean? So, like, that's why we're so focused on not just the quality process, but providing that feedback loop to our external assessors, so they're constantly learning. I can tell you in, I don't know, let's say 2017, when I was doing this type of work, the feedback loop wasn't really there for HITRUST, but over time, all the external assessor firms they've now learned, and that's why that escalated QA number has gone from 11% down to, I think it's 1.2% of assessments or something like that. So we're teaching them and we're giving that feedback to them so that, one, the assessment is done right, but they're going to get better over time.
And then also with that CCSFP or otherwise, if you go off and you get certified, is that something that moves with you, or is that connected to the company?
That's a good question. It moves with you, but the company is still required to have a minimum of 5. So if you leave, they have to train somebody else, whether that's a new hire or what have you.
Yeah, because I think that's a pretty good thing too, because I forget which one it was, but there's another thing where, like, oh, it's connected to the company, so if you leave, you lose your certification. I forget which one that was. It sounds really familiar to like the CMMC process, but a little bit more on steroids, to be honest with you, like with SPAR, submitting the assessment to SPARS for review and getting your accreditation.
Yeah, so I had a lot of folks in the external assessor community when CMMC was getting off the ground saying, looks like they stole everything from you guys. Why didn't they just use you guys? But that's neither here nor there.
Right. Yeah. And B-dubs also reminded me that's PCI with the QSA. So that's with the business and not with the individual. If you move, you lose that. Let's see here. Let's pick another one here. What findings from the internal audits are shared with the external assessors for improvement?
So maybe we can catch us up on the chat, but clarifying question, when we talk about the internal audit, are we talking about how my compliance team internally audits the QA analyst, or are we talking about the QA analyst auditing the external assessor? And I'll answer the second scenario first. The external assessor definitely knows what they did wrong from our QA analysts. Like, the feedback actually doesn't go to the customer. The feedback goes directly to the external assessor because they're the ones that did the validation. So they know, hey, you did this testing wrong, or this evidence does not satisfy the requirements, or you didn't sample this properly, or what have you. Whatever the circumstances may be, that goes directly to the external assessor. Now, my compliance team internally auditing the assurance team, keep in mind that that's an audit to make sure that the assurance analyst did their job, not necessarily did the assessment have issues. There is an element of both there, but it's more focused on the QA analyst doing their job properly versus was there issues with the assessment. And that feedback's given directly, obviously, to the QA analyst.
Yeah, and then I feel like you addressed this one pretty well too, on where the updates come from. You guys are getting threat intelligence based on that and whatever other updates.
Yeah, so from a threat adaptive perspective, that's all driven based off of the threat data. The biannual updates to the framework, that's sometimes things that we want to do. Like, our next version will be version 12, which will come out at the end of the year. We're actually restructuring the framework a little bit so that we can do continuous assurance in the future. So instead of HITRUST kind of being a point-in-time assessment, we're going to build this ability for assurance to be perpetual, if you will. Sometimes it's because customers said, hey, it would be really great if you could map to X, Y, or Z. So then we add that to the framework moving forward.
And then HITRUST covers IoT, right? Sounds like it's going to be really good for cloud as well.
Yes, and yes. So one thing that I didn't mention here is all the major cloud providers, beyond Azure, AWS, and GCP, but I think there's almost 30 now of the biggest players in the game who are all HITRUST certified. And instead of in the SOC 2 world where you would just carve out Azure and say, we're not going to test Azure because Azure is not going to let us into their data center, or we're just going to pull down the Azure SOC 2, which doesn't have a ton of information, and use that to supplement our testing. We actually built a mechanism in our tool, MyCSF, where Azure is certified now. All of them are certified now. So any of the controls that they're responsible for, whether fully or partially, we have a shared responsibilities program where in our tool, you say, I'm a customer of Azure. They manage this physical security control. I would like to request the results of their testing and bring it into my assessment, because we believe in comprehensive looks at an organization. If Azure is managing, 25% of the controls for you, we want the readers of your report to know that. So the results of their testing actually gets pulled into your assessment. So there's no gaps in the control environment in the outcome of testing.
I mean, it's sounding like quite a godly framework, to be honest with you. Now, I think that also coincides with this one as well. So, oh, wait, hold on. That's not there was another one in here, I thought. So there was another question along the lines of like, okay, that sounds great, but then how do we get started with HITRUST? And one of the things I was going to mention alongside that is getting started in HITRUST. One of the big issues that, I think it's pretty common practice at this point is businesses just want to check those boxes, get their contracts and so forth. So especially if you're not in an environment that has it already, what kind of selling points do you have when you're looking at something as intense as this is?
Yeah, I think I got a couple of answers for that. So beyond the less than 1% breach rate, I think is pretty compelling stuff in the world that we live in today. But like I said, I'm building reciprocity programs with other standards bodies, GovRAMP, FedRAMP. At some point, I'm going to try to get in front of CMMC and others. So the goal is for you to be able to use and do one assessment and apply it to as much as possible. But at a minimum, we have capability in our tool, MyCSF, that let's say you're subject to 853, you can actually run a report based on your HITRUST assessment and show maturity against 853. Sometimes it'll be full coverage, sometimes it won't. There's a lot of nuance there. If anybody's curious on how that works, get with me offline because, like I said, lots of nuance. But I think the one thing that is right now, really, really compelling, maybe not most, but really, really compelling, is the Lloyds of London, the cyber insurance industry. I briefed them very similar to the way that I briefed you today on HITRUST, and they are believers so much so that they give R2 certified organizations a 25% credit on their policy during underwriting. And that may result in a straight up 25% discount. It could mean higher coverage limits, lower premiums. There's lots of other things that go into that factoring, but right off the cuff, like let's say you have nothing, or you have SOC 2, or you have NIST, or you have FedRAMP, or whatever, you're not getting that off the cuff. With HITRUST, you're getting that 25% from the start.
And you might not have an answer to it, but so if HITRUST already built all of this in, then what is the point on going off and getting SOC or getting FedRAMP or getting these other things? Then why go through the additional process? You don't have to answer it, but I wanted to throw that out there.
That anybody asks. So FedRAMP is very niche, right? If you're a cloud service provider and you want to sell into the federal government, you got to have FedRAMP. Like right now, that's the only mechanism. It's changing. If anybody's been paying attention, FedRAMP, the PMO got gutted by DOJ. and they're pushing everything out. Like I'm in a couple of working groups from FedRAMP where they're trying to figure out how do we leverage other things like HITRUST, SOC 2, whatever it is. So in the future, you may be able to use HITRUST for FedRAMP. As far as SOC 2 goes, I mean, as much as I would love to say that SOC 2 is going to go away, it's not, and it's so widely known that it's kind of the king of the castle here in the US, whereas 27001 is the king of the castle overseas. So you, from a gaining customers perspective, more of your customers, unfortunately, and I am passionate in trying to change this, we're probably going to accept SOC 2 more commonly than HITRUST. So getting through the door right now, SOC 2 will help. I could give an entire presentation, feel free to invite me if you want to, on why SOC 2 should not be used for TPRM. I won't even talk about HITRUST. So I'm hoping that will change. I think it's starting to change. There's a big quality concern with SOC 2 right now, and it's being commoditized. And I don't think it's going away. So why would someone even go after SOC 2? Because someone's asking for it.
Yeah, I figured I'd throw that out there, especially with these startups out there and so forth. Now, do you guys also account for different regulations as well?
We don't have SOCs, so not SOCs built into the framework as of today. I'd have to honestly dig into that a little bit. SOCs is not something that we come across all that often.
Yeah, and that could also be a little difficult to bolt on, I would imagine, for the regulations. You guys seem a lot more focused on some of these different controls, and overall the threat intelligence aspect. Like, what do we actually need? I think you said that the highest tier was like 346 controls or something along those lines.
On average, 379. I've seen some as large as 1,000.
Yeah.
Significant emotional events.
I think that was the same one. SOC 2 shares more in common to a REMA paper than this. Yeah. On track of being really serious about security before pursuing the cert. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I wanted to mention a moment ago, that we did slightly cover too, is that a lot of organizations, like, I could definitely see the appeal as far as HITRUST goes, but I think the hard part would be that selling point on, hey, less than a 1% breach rate. And then also, that's, like you said, it can be pretty intense.
Yeah.
Could you just stay at the low level though, if you chose to? You don't have to move up tier.
Yeah. And the way that we built it is, I don't think I mentioned this, the 44 controls in the E1 are at the core of the 182 of the I1, and 182 of the I1 are at the core of the R2. So if you decide to move up, you're not losing any of the work that you've already done. And there's nothing saying that you have to move up. If you're a low risk organization and the E1 is good enough, then the E1's good enough. I am seeing more and more, we call them relying parties, a party that relies on some kind of assurance mechanism, whether it's their own questionnaire, SOC, HITRUST, NIST, whatever it is. I'm seeing more and more, at minimum, scrutinizing a SOC 2 report and rejecting the vendor's SOC 2 report, or just flat out not accepting them anymore. Now, not to say that there's this huge wave of change happening, but it's starting to change. Like, people are starting to recognize, to that, that person's comment, that they're really not worth all that much unless you have a really good auditor. Like, there's not enough detail there. I posted about this on LinkedIn yesterday. I was on a call with a large organization in the healthcare industry, and they made a comment that people are reluctant to share their HITRUST report because there's so much sensitive information in it, but they're willing to give their SOC 2 report. Like, if that's not indicative of the problem, like, if there's nothing sensitive in a SOC 2, then where's the value?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good shout out. And I also dropped a link to that post in chat as well, if you guys want to take a look at it. I saw that post yesterday as well. So it's a pretty good note. And yeah, I mean, I've heard pretty similar as far as like the SOC 2 goes about, So that's, the industry seems to move slow. But we'll see. Let's see. What other questions do we have here? I also dropped a link for the stage if anybody wants to come into the back. We'll probably fly through a couple more of these questions real quick. So also the review, the Q&A, is that just the assessments submitted annually, or is that the quarterly as well? Or how does that work? Is it every assessment that's submitted?
Every assessment, if you want to get certified by HITRUST, every assessment is submitted to us. And that's done at whatever frequency you need to be certified. So for the E1 and the I1, you're going to go through your initial certification, and then 1 year later, you're going to have to do it again. For the R2, it's a 2-year cycle, but at the 12-month mark of that 2-year cycle, there's kind of a check on learning. We call them interim assessments. So there's retesting that's done. There's a check on the caps to make sure that you've made progress on closing those caps. And then any changes to the environment are captured there as well, because as you all know, no environment is static over a 12-month period.
Yeah, if your report looks the same 12 months from now, there's a problem.
Right.
And then this is a really good one too. So they'd like to understand the treat approach a little bit better and how that differs from the RMF.
I'm not sure I understood. What does that mean, treat approach?
So I think you might have mentioned something along the lines of like the way that you guys are approaching these different gaps and kind of tuning, kind of scoping down into it. You actually dig down into the actual landscape, the environment itself, and it's not so high level. Like what's the life cycle look like for the POAMs maybe, or the corrective actions for treating the findings?
Okay. So like I said, they have to write a corrective action plan prior to submitting it to us for certification. So there's elements within those corrective action plans that have to be written and defined, and with timelines and specific actions on how they plan on closing it. I think there's even, I don't think actually we give or require an owner, because we wouldn't know who the owner is internally, but if we want to know what the plan is, and then we look at that again when it comes to the recert time to make sure that those gaps have been closed. So it's designed to be cyclical, but forcing function for organizations to continue to improve. Right? You can get I keep on picking on SOC 2, but it's just because it's so common and so known. Like you can have exceptions in a SOC 2 and just have them perpetually year over year. And what level of trust does that instill between organizations?
All right. And then we've got a couple more here. And then one of the things that I really like is that it looks like you guys are also publishing like these metrics publicly, like your guys' low breach, what the assessors training is like and so forth. So that transparency is pretty awesome. Do you guys provide benchmarking data as well, or?
We do actually. So in our report, you can see, and per the question, it's anonymized, but it will show you kind of where you stand against your peers. Not like your specific peers, but the industry averages across the rest of the certified pool. So if you're scoring at a certain level, we'll tell you whether that's higher or lower or on average with the rest of organizations. And we're actually coming out with, and I think there was a question that may have pointed to this. We're actually coming out with a benchmarking for our external assessors. So we're going to give them like a scoring feedback, and then there's going to be some of that that's going to be made publicly available to the market. So then they would have a level of understanding about, those external assessors and the quality work that they do.
Yeah, and that's pretty impressive. I also dropped a link to that report in chat again as well, for you guys to take a look at that. And then there's also this one too. So remain audit ready. Are there any best practice templates to capture attributes, elements like population size, sampling methodologies? I think that's there's sections for that in the manual, right?
Yeah. So one thing really quickly, that link for the trust report, you're going to have to do a form fill to get access to it. If you're willing to do that, fine. If not, I think we'll put my email in the chat. Just email it directly. I'll send it to you. So best practice for getting ready for HITRUST is get with an external assessor as early as possible. They're going to be your Sherpa. They're going to guide you. They're doing this every single day. Most times, in my experience, if someone tries to do readiness and benchmarking on their own, they are so married to their environments that they can't see the warts. And when it comes time for that external assessor to come in and do validation, they're going to call your baby ugly, and you're not going to like it. So get with them as early on as possible. As elements like population size and sampling methodology, that's more for the external assessors to figure out and not for the entity being certified. You are going to provide them the information for population sizes, right? Again, I'll just use endpoints as an example. They're going to come to you and say, how many endpoints are in this scoped environment? And you're going to have to tell them there's 250. They are then going to randomly select which endpoints that they want to test. So there's a lot of work that's put on the shoulders of the external assessors. And as an entity looking to get certified, you're kind of providing the information in order for them to do that assessment.
Welcome to the party, pal, David B, by the way. That is definitely true. Better late than never. Yeah, I got to get with Professor Black Ops. He streams and really big with 853, DoD background, so forth. There he is, NIST 53 for life. I don't know, PBO. HITRUST is sounding pretty interesting here. Come on. Okay, here we go. So the 90-day and 60-day incubation periods, my thought was that controls that may evolve during that window, thus potentially challenging the evidencing. I think that was in relation to that first question.
Yeah, so I guess that requires me to tell you some other elements of this. So HITRUST doesn't certify organizations. We certify implemented systems. So you can't have an environment that is in dev, that's in test, or what have you. It has to be in production in order for it to get certified. Now, as far as controls changing during those incubation periods, you're right, that would make providing evidence difficult. I would recommend get with the external assessor, figure out what makes the most sense from a timing perspective. Also, get with us. People, historically have thought that HITRUST is this ivory tower that they can't talk to, and they don't want to show their warts to the certifying body. We're here to be a part of the equation. So if there's unique circumstances, reach out to me, and I'll get you in front of the right people to solution what the right answer is based on your unique circumstances.
Did you have something to add here in particular, PBO?
I felt like you summoned me up to the panel, so I had to pop in.
Oh,
No, great talk, Ron. I guess, and he kind of hit on it, is the government's just so set in their ways. They still want you to be FedRAMP, state ramp, and state ramp changed their name to GovRAMP, which I hate, but then Texas have their own ramp. So all those are NIST 800-53, and I think they're going to be around forever. But once again, I think they're doing a great work in HITRUST because I thought HIPAA was a little too light, so they needed some definitely a little more implementation heavy. So once again, I think that they're doing great work, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, if you were to ask me, what would you want to unseat 853? I would say that's a ridiculous thing to even ask, because it's through the federal government. The federal government is not about to abandon 853.
Thanks.
Although, even though there's debate right now that FedRAMP should go to 171, which I don't agree with either, but that's why we mapped 853. If you're in a world where 853 matters to you because you're doing business with either a state or federal government, well, great. Let's just make it more efficient. We don't have to supplant 853. Let's just make sure that the work you do against HITRUST can be translated to 853. we actually have reports that will do that translation, right? So PBO, you know the control categories, like AC2 is AC2 regardless of what flavor there is. But the control to HITRUST, if you're a consumer of a HITRUST report, you're not going to know that maps to 800 or to AC2.
Wow.
So we actually have the capability to take the results of your HITRUST testing and write it in a report in the language of 853. So if you're a consumer, if you're a federal agency, you don't have to learn HITRUST. You're just going to stick with what you know, but you're going to see the result of testing for HITRUST. Just again, making it that much more efficient and less friction.
And I mean, I think this is really eye-opening, to be honest, because it's just like Age also mentions in chat here that HITRUST has always been associated with healthcare. That's stuff I still hear people talking about to this day.
Oh, facts.
And just looking at these metrics, it's actually really incredible. Like getting that 0.59% breach report, reported, that's crazy in today's world, especially when you're looking at primarily enterprise level, environments. But now I don't know how much detail you can go into, but I think you mentioned like during 2019 or 2020 is when you guys kind of moved away from the healthcare, or how much of this is getting picked up, would you say?
Actually, I just realized that I can't share my screen, but I'm bringing up the trust report because we have a breakdown. So I'll just speak to it on what industries. So let me bring you guys back up because I like to see your faces when I do this. In 2024, healthcare only accounted for 25.9% of certified organizations. Software and technology, 37.3%. Arguably, software and technology, they're probably working within healthcare. 19% business services. We have manufacturing, we have government, we have retail, almost 10% in financial services. So we do have a pretty good slice of other industries that are utilizing the framework.
Yeah, and like he was looking at is particularly an IT data center providers. So
if you're familiar with oh my God, Clear Data, Cloudticity, Rackspace, they're all HITRUST certified. It's applicable. Like I said, all the big infrastructure as a service cloud providers are HITRUST certified at this point. So it definitely applies. Actually, we were more focused on on-prem data centers for the longest time. And obviously most people have migrated to the cloud. So that's why you're seeing more and more folks get certified against HITRUST.
And I believe you mentioned earlier that when you guys were making HITRUST originally, it was the 53 and ISO that kind of influenced some of it, right?
Yeah, we say 27001 is the backbone, but we are so much more granular than ISO 27001. I think you'd be hard pressed to kind of see it anymore in the framework.
What hardening standards are y'all using? Y'all CIS level 2? What are y'all using for hardening on?
We leave it to the organization to determine what they want to use.
Boo! I don't trust organizations. You give them too much credit. Go ahead. I don't trust them.
They have to prove it. They can't just say they're doing it. They have to prove it to us.
Okay. I'm a little more prescriptive, but I understand that. I'm an old STIG guy. I like to make it super hard.
Yeah, I am intimately familiar with the STIGs. I did try to convince, the big brains that we keep locked in a room to build the CIS benchmarks into the framework and the platform, so it tells people exactly how to do what. But we're not there yet.
I tell you, I was surprised state ramp / government, they pushing STIGs. I was surprised when I read through their framework. They're actually pushing STIGs for their implementation.
I'm not surprised. They're government affiliated, even though CIS was federally funded. They're a government adjacent organization, whereas the DISA STIGs, it's a federal agency.
Most people are backing away from them because they say they're too hard. I've been on a lot of panels where we almost got in a fist fight, but Shout out to the Stigs. I'm giving the Shigs a shout out. So, but yeah, it's so a lot of people are going to the CIS benchmarks. I think that's for little kids. Now I retract that. Put my sign up, Chris. I'm about to go in on people now.
Oh gosh.
But no, so
yeah. PBO is not a spokesperson for Study GRC. Everything Professor Blackops says is his own words and not anybody else's.
Facts, man. Let's go big. Stigging it. Go ahead, Chris. Stigging it.
The big benefit that I see is that it quickly maps to all of these other options. So especially if you are handling 7 or 8 or even 4 different things that you have to work with, then this is probably going to be more cost effective is also what it's looking like. I don't see any metrics on here. Maybe it's in the reports as far as ROI, but it's looking pretty promising.
One thing that was not in this brief, but I think is probably relevant to this community is, so when you get certified, you get 3 reports. One is like training wheels. It's a certification letter. The second one is certification with scope. And the third one is the full report. Still PDFs, right? Everybody has some kind of tool that they're using, whether it's homegrown or commercially bought from a GRC perspective. We actually have a capability to transmit structured data, JSON, testing results, and you can consume it into anything you want. We've actually built an app with ServiceNow for the TPM module. So you can pull testing results, whether your own testing results or your vendor's testing results, into that tool. So to me, that's the movement in the future is structured data, because digging through PDFs is a freaking nightmare. And especially if you're looking for some actionable intelligence because something has changed, whether it's a 0-day or something else, if you have to figure out from your vendor pool who is potentially susceptible, digging through a PDF for every single vendor to ascertain that is not possible. But if you have it all in structured data, it's probably just some kind of query. Hey, who didn't score well against MFA? Now you have a short list of vendors you need to go to and ask them about where they're at, whatever the circumstances may be. But I think that's where we all need to move in the future, is that structured data reporting format.
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggling like Log4j. Your vendors was using stuff that they didn't even know they had Log4j in there. So it was like, so a lot of people was really struggling with your vendors' best things they like to use. So I think that's still something I think we're trying to figure out. Like you said, that will help out because at least you could query it, but working with your third-party vendors trying to figure out, I don't think half them know what they're using, because they're just querying stuff using frameworks and they don't really know what's in those frameworks. But
mix and match.
So
now, as an individual who wants to get an upskill in HITRUST, it looks like this assessment handbook is probably going to be a really good route. But looking at like what other training that's available, or what are there any like type of conventions that you go to, or how could somebody get more involved with HITRUST as an individual who wants to get into that?
Yeah, so we used to run an annual conference. It just happened in October, but this year we have decided to not have an annual conference. I'm putting the chat for you, Chris, so you can send it out to the masses here. If people want to attend any of the training that we provide, here is a link to that. It's open to anybody. We attend a lot of conferences, so I do a lot of presentations. I was actually just in DC on Tuesday presenting on HITRUST, and actually I was presenting on ransomware TPRM. But follow me on LinkedIn. Follow HITRUST on LinkedIn. You'll see the events that we're attending. I'm hoping our annual conference will come back in 2026, because I personally thought there was a lot of value in it, but that's still to be decided. But between the training that we offer, I'm happy to do any kind of one-on-one sessions or what have you, and meeting us out at conferences or attending our webinars. I probably present almost once or twice a week on webinars at this point, talking about all this stuff. And the topics vary. Some are really high level, some are a bit more technical. That's probably the best ways for you to get a bit smarter on HITRUST.
That was actually one of the parts that I forgot to mention, because when I was looking around at it, yeah, you guys have a ton of webinars available as well on various topics, just freely available. Now, I also dropped a link in this chat as well for Wild West Hacking Fest. Most of the community here is already aware of it, but that's a really good conference if you guys want to look at that and consider that as an option, because I have not seen you guys there.
South Dakota, place I've never been.
Oh, it's amazing. It is. This is the next best to DEF CON. So just saying.
Boo in South Dakota. Boo.
Oh, come on, PBO. We're going to drag you out there too.
I don't know, Chris. We're going to have a deep conversation to get me to South Dakota, man.
Oh,
maybe for you, I might roll out there, man, but I don't know, man.
Yeah, we'll just pick you up at your AWS meetup.
Facts. Hey, you late, David. We was beating up on SOC 2, man. Where was you at, man? We was beating up on SOC 2. I was thinking about
I keep trying to tell you, that's not the only thing we do. I am a CCSFP, Ryan, and I really like HITRUST enough to go get my CCSFP, right? To the point where we're about to do our first A1, and you know, I know you can't give me any insider tips, but we're really just trying to integrate all these things, and everything that you said, and Chris knows that. Unfortunately, I was a little late, but I catch up at 2.5 speed, and I was listening intently as fast as I could to try to catch up with you guys. But everything that you said, and I'm going to go back and watch at a slower speed. It reiterates what I try to tell my clients or our clients, and then other people too. Is just that it encompasses so many things, and then you can add on, and then you have such a diverse background of things to test on that you should be covered in everything. I mean, almost everything except for SOC, really.
Which is actually mapped into the framework. You could, in theory, run a report against the trust service criteria.
And so we do many different things with smaller clients too, where we'll do a HITRUST plus. I didn't know if you actually mentioned any of that, or it's just more of a it doesn't give them any type of HITRUST accreditation or certification, but it's just saying that yes, you've met these SOC 2 requirements, and then here's that little bit of add-on to help them. Sometimes it entices them to jump into HITRUST, but some of the clients that we have are small, and it just doesn't make sense for them. So we try to work with all of our clients to actually fit their needs, because if we force something down their throat, like then they're either going to hold it against us or never do business with us, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so I always, and I remember watching the recording from Marissa, and you had lots of comments, so I do remember you.
I hope that's a good thing.
No, it is. Like, I know you work for an external assessor firm, and I understand that you all just want to do right by your clients. I always encourage people to talk to their external assessors, whether it be for HITRUST or what have you. Understanding the client's needs and business drivers is a big factor in what they pursue. There's really 3 buckets of folks that pursue HITRUST at this point. You're being asked to pursue HITRUST. You want to differentiate yourself in the market, or you want to just do right from a security and privacy perspective. Those are primarily the 3 reasons. If you don't fall into one of those 3 buckets, I mean, I'd love for you to pursue HITRUST, but it may not make sense for you to do it.
Yeah, 100%. Nobody wants to do an audit that they don't want or don't need, if you will. And again, I'm just doing air quotes here, right? Need is a relative, but the point is, I love HITRUST for the prescriptiveness. I know that some people might tell you that, or might tell you the opposite, but some of the things that I deal with in, say, a SOC 2 is so gray. With my military background, I do appreciate sometimes the black and white of it, and so yeah, yeah, PBO making fun of me, but we do a little bit of everything at this my company, excuse me. Not that I own, but anyways. And I love, I'm having so much fun just getting to see so many different clients and how they do things. And it's awesome to see how Bob's whatever does their way of security implementation. So yeah, it's exciting to me. I still have fun doing it.
No, shout out to Dave. I don't mean to pigeonhole him. He's very diverse, and I kind of like him, actually. I don't like a lot of people out here, so shout out to my man. That's why I be public. I'm trying to get Ryan to be more prescriptive, and he needs to make everybody do the STIGs. He's not quite prescriptive enough. He's leaning. I think he's leaning that way, but we need to tell him to put that stig on there. Got to stig him. Give him a little too much freedom. He's giving him a little too much freedom. Go ahead,
MITRE
Ryan.
ATT&CK's not enough.
Give him a little too much freedom to them companies. We got to lock them down.
Well, it's just like you guys were talking about, is that it does come down to those businesses too. Like either they want it or they don't. I mean, that's the struggle these days, is that, you know, you got to, you know, get that buy-in. And
I think HITRUST, and I mean, I think DOD did it. They said to do business with us, you have to do STIGs. State ramp, now GovRamp is saying the same thing. If you want our step, you have to do that. I think Ryan's giving them too much wiggle room over there. He let them wiggle too much. But
no, hey Ryan, I know you're from Texas, so gig them instead of stig them, gig them. Sorry.
Yeah. So I actually have to go back to the specific control language and see what we specify. But GovRamp, we have a pilot with them right now where they'll accept HITRUST without doing a separate assessment. So they must feel comfortable with the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're doing great work. We just need to tighten it up just a little bit. Just tighten it up right there. But me, I'm old, so I'm a prescriptive guy. And two is, I think you help the smaller non-mature companies, because the STIG says this window check has to be X. You don't have to guess. You don't have a lot of what about this or that. It's like either we putting it on or we're not. So once again, I think that's me being old and curmudgeon too. So,
well, I'll say this. Okay, maybe HITRUST is not that black and white then PBO, so there is a little bit of it. But like he said too about the Ryan May mentioned you. What did you ask PBO about the lockdown, or what was it you said? What level of
CIS? I think we were talking about CIS checks he were doing. Was he using level 1 or 2? I don't know. We've been up here for a minute. You late?
Yeah, I apologize. Like I said, I was trying to catch up as quickly as I can. I apologize for being late to the party. But Ryan, we're also about to do a rapid search. So I mean, I don't know if you got into any of that on here or not, because that's interesting, and I look forward to doing that.
Yeah, I didn't mention the rapid research, and I actually didn't mention the AI cert that we have either. You mentioned the AI one. So in December of 24, we released another assessment that's specifically focused on AI security. So that's at the maximum 44 controls. And when I say that, it's because there's some tailoring questions up front about the type of AI that you're using. If you're using Gen AI, it bumps up to that 44. But it has to be built on one of the other 3 assessments that I've already told you about, because our perspective, along with a 15-month-long working group that we did across all industries, told us that you have to have foundational security in order for the models to be secure. Mm-hmm. So that AI assessment needs to be built on either an E1, I1, or R2. Mm-hmm. As far as the rapid research goes, right now it's only available for the I1. So you get certified. After 12 months, you can do this rapid research. And instead of testing the full 182 controls, it kind of follows the same model as the R2, where there's an interim assessment. But in this case, there's a testing of 60 and change controls, not change controls, but 60 and change number of controls that have to be tested. And if you reach the scoring threshold for those, then it extends it for another 2 years. But in that 3rd year, it extends it for another year. The end of that 2-year period, you have to do the full recertification again. But if we change any of the core controls based on the threat intelligence from year 1 to that rapid research, you will test that 60 plus any of the new controls that are protecting against the threats that are happening today. So we don't lose sight over the threat data in that rapid research program.
And you know what? Across those 19 domains, there's so many things that some of our clients may get a little or feel a little overwhelmed, but we help walk them through, and any readiness reports that we do with them, that goes a long way. But that does it. If you are willing to spend the time with the client to make sure that they feel comfortable in what they're paying for, then I 100% back that. So, and you guys have been extremely helpful too. Like even some QA comments that come back, they all make sense. And then we have got on different calls with some of your team before and talked through them together. And sure enough, everybody, nobody had an ego. We were just trying to explain our side of the street, and your QA was trying to see it from or explain it from your side, obviously. And we had a good back and forth, and I think everybody came to an understanding. So it's been a pleasure working. I'm not here to. I don't work for HITRUST, but it's been a pleasure working with HITRUST. That's for sure.
Yeah, man, we're gonna confiscate your email, man. I think you're giving Ryan too much love, man.
Yeah, David.
That's a bromance over there. I'm a little suspicious. I'm suspicious, David. I'm suspicious.
Yeah, so we do typically keep these meetings to about 2 hours. So we are coming to an end here shortly. If anybody else does want to come on stage, definitely do so. I could drop that link again if you would like. One of the things I did want to mention here too is that I did drop a link to the AI page for HITRUST, but you can also find the webinars, events, and so forth, including that academy here under the events and training. But I really like the fact that it's all laid out for AI, third-party risk management, your assurance program, and you also it's pretty straightforward too. You guys have a lot in here. Something that I would like to see is, so this academy is great, and I love the fact that an individual could go through this, but that's also outside of the budget for most individuals. And so something I would like to see is some type of introduction course that actually outlines hey, this is what it's all about. This is who it applies to. I think I've seen that for SOC 2 and a lot of these other options out there. I feel like that's what makes it really difficult for individuals to upskill on it. I think if you
scroll up, Chris, stop right there. Nope.
This new customer?
There. New customer orientation. I developed that course. I used to teach it. This is HITRUST 101, and it's free.
Oh, okay. So it's not just for new customer. Okay.
Yeah, the wording's bad, Ryan. I think the word's a little bad.
Yeah.
I will tell you, it's designed for new customers because we have found in the past that people couldn't spell HITRUST, and so it made getting assessed really difficult. But if anybody in your community wants to attend this, just let me know. I'll get you into it.
Okay.
Perfect. Well, that answers that question.
I might roll up in there.
You got an answer for all of it.
And Ryan, please correct me if I'm wrong here, and if you've already stated it, then I apologize. I didn't get to see it, but I understand your Chris about the free stuff first, right? 100%, totally, and you want to see if you're good for this or cut out possibly, but I can't just become a CCSFP and then certify somebody in HITRUST. I obviously have to be part of an organization that has already met that requirement, etc. So if you already mentioned that, Ryan, then I apologize for bringing it up again. But that's where I was trying to, Chris, just even out the playing field, if you will. It's not like I can just get that certification like a Sec Plus and now I can start, handing out HITRUST because I am a CCSFP. So.
Yeah, and also we dropped a link for this manual, this assessment handbook, a few times as well. I could drop it again. This is what I would be skimming through to get a really good understanding. Because the way I'm looking at it is okay, if I want to work for an organization that's asking for HITRUST, but I don't have the experience, then what am I supposed to do? And it looks like going through that customer training section there and also researching and going through this handbook would be the key thing. So that way I can talk the talk.
And Ryan told you need to hang out with PBO and do NIST 800-53 and then match.
Oh,
that's
gosh.
what he said. No, I'm just playing. That's what I heard.
Not again.
Listen,
not again.
That's not what I said. I don't want to get in trouble for
No, I'm joking.
I already went through your 60 plus hours on YouTube about 53. Come on, PBO.
Shout out to my 60 hours. No. But I am a big HITRUST fan. I used to do a lot of HIPAA work for small companies because three guys in the garage think they're gonna roll up to a hospital and sell them software. So I used to do a lot of work helping small firms at least get some general paperwork to get started. So big fan of HITRUST.
We have such a biased panel, man. We got to scrap this whole thing. Come on, PBO.
And you gotta, and I love the unique IDs too, the BUIDs that are put out there, because when you get your clients working towards that, all their policies start to relate to that, Ryan, so that when we can quickly do a policy procedure lookup, they're like, oh, look at that, interesting. The BUID is already there for us.
Yeah, I used to tell my customers there's an art and science to HITRUST. So doing what you just said is more of the science. But Chris, if you scroll down, like there's a ton of information in here. Like I don't remember exactly what section it's in, but there's a section on significant changes. So if there's a significant change in your environment, we have issued guidance on how that should be handled. Because everybody's environment is kind of dynamic, generally speaking. So it gives you information to make some strategic calls on deployment timelines, when you're going to migrate something, what have you, or you just may lose your certification while that migration happens, and then you just recertify afterwards. But everybody's on the same page, and that decision is made deliberately.
Is there a
I don't know
definition
how many
for
pages this is.
Is there a
This looks
definition
pretty
for
big.
significant change? Is that more than 10%, more than 20? Do they talk about?
There is a definition. It's not percentage.
Okay. We used to argue about that in this because they have the same verbiage, but it's like, okay, what does that mean? We were trying to figure out, is that 10%, 20% new functionality? What is that?
It's more, PBO, it's more about the controls versus the environments.
Okay.
How many of it has the controls environment changed, right? And I'll just give you a really cliche example. If you're currently in Azure and you're migrating to AWS, like that's a whole new set of controls that have to be tested, right?
Fact.
To ensure that they're configured properly. So
that makes sense.
There's details in there, but if anybody ever goes down this path, or maybe you're going down this path now and you have a question about significant changes, again, reach out to me. I will not tell you because my assurance team yells at me when I tell people, because it's not my decision to do that. But I will get you in front of the people who can tell you exactly what your left and right limit are.
Okay.
My email, I guess, will get stuck in the chat if anybody wants to reach out to me directly. Again, I'm here as a resource for you all.
Bam. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, and we'll also add all of these resources in the description below for anybody on replay. David's going to go back through it, I'm sure. And then last call for the badges. So we're going to go around the room real quick like we typically do. But starting with you, Ryan, any final remarks or any key things that you wanted to add as we close?
I think just, your father's HITRUST is not today's HITRUST. And if you had preconceived ideas, understand that they're probably not accurate. I mean, there's a lot of people who think they really know HITRUST through and through. And when, I dig in with them, they're like, oh, wow, I didn't know that. So feel free to be an open book and ask me questions. I'm a resource to you all. Like I said, it's a part of my role. I mean, we just want to continue to innovate and evolve and, help organizations protect themselves and, protect their broader community, if you will, through their vendors. So give us a look.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And you also mentioned earlier as well that you guys are working on that transparency and so forth too, even further, as you guys, are just, trying to showcase the added benefits, and you guys are not just healthcare, which I think is actually kind of mind blowing because I've heard that so many times.
And that's the preconceived ideas that I'm referring to. You think you know, but you don't know. It's been 7 years.
Ooh, wait, Ryan, that should be your new campaign. You think you know HITRUST. You haven't even met us yet. Something like that,
That would be a good B-roll or Super Bowl ad. I'm just saying.
You got to be careful. That's a Biggie rap song. You might have to get that cleared.
Yeah.
If you don't know, now you know.
Not that one, but
it was close.
I had a LinkedIn post within the last 30 days. I don't remember exactly where it was, but I had that as the tagline, and then I had a picture of an abstract picture of Biggie as the image in the LinkedIn post because of that song.
See, come on, David. He's on the line with me, man. Shout out to him.
All right,
I'm liking Ryan more and more now. I'm liking
you
Ryan
think
more
you
and
know?
more.
You don't know. And then HITRUST instead of Jack. You don't. Not like I work for marketing or anything, but hey, thanks so much, guys. Though I appreciate it. My phone's dying over here, Ryan. It's been a pleasure. Hope to talk to you soon. I guess on the actual other end, maybe, and maybe see you at one of those conferences with some of my teammates. But thank you, PBO and Chris, for everything y'all do too, and everybody watching. Have a great night, and I'll come back and watch the video at a little slower speed. Y'all take care.
Damn, thank
Thanks
you.
so much for having me.
PBO, final remarks?
No, it was great. Like he said, I didn't know a few things. I didn't know they branched out and crossing over to other industries, because I just had them pegged for the HIPAA and HITRUST. So I learned something today. And once again, it's a great framework. They're doing great things. And like I said, it's one of the, I think, one of the more comprehensive frameworks. So shout out to Ryan and their team. So
Thank you,
Yeah,
sir.
and then also, if you guys want to reach out to me, then maybe we could just compile one email over to Ryan for this orientation training, so he doesn't get 50 of them. But
nice.
we'll see how that works out there. Yeah, and thanks for popping up as well, PBO.
Oh, no problem. You kept putting shots fired. I was like, I think I need to go up there. But no, I appreciate it.
I'm just saying, what's the point of 53 when we got high trust? Just saying.
Yeah, but
Just
he
saying.
said the government's fed ramping, man. They're not gonna change.
We got Doge.
I don't know. Doge might take them out. I don't know. So who knows?
It's possible, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll see. Thank you all for jumping and joining us today, especially for those who popped up on the panel and all of the questions. Really awesome questions today as well. And again, thank you so much for your time today, Ryan. I'll catch you guys. We'll probably do an AMA tomorrow at 11 a.m. Central still. And I'll see you guys in Discord. You guys have a great rest of the night. GRC Mafia.
Thanks.